It begins with a smile. That's what made him different. That's what made him so dangerous. Ted Bundy didn't lurk in dark alleyways with a knife already drawn. He didn't stalk his victims with snarls or slurred threats. He asked politely. He wore a cast. He limped with crutches. He smiled. And they followed. They followed the soft voice, the boyish grin, the neat hair, and the air of intelligence. They followed him willingly. Because who would ever suspect that behind the charm lived a predator who would leave behind bodies, grief, and unanswered questions stretching across an entire country? Tonight we begin one of the most unsettling true crime stories ever told. The story of a man who seemed too normal, too nice, too clean-cut to be what he truly was. One of the most prolific serial killers in American history. His name was Theodore Robert Bundy. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this type of long-form, relaxing true crime storytelling, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more of these stories to life and build a global community of curious, thoughtful listeners. Now let's slip into the shadows of the 1970s, into a world where college campuses were shaken by disappearances, where smiles masked danger, and where the name Bundy would soon send chills through every American household. At first, there were no patterns, no fingerprints, no warnings. In the early months of 1974, something strange was happening in Washington state. Young women were vanishing, not running away, not even fighting back, it seemed. They would go out for groceries, for class, for coffee with a friend, and then they'd simply disappear. Their cars were left parked, their doors were still locked, there were no signs of struggle, and yet one after another, they were gone. The first official disappearance was Linda Ann Healy, a bright and responsible 21-year-old University of Washington student. On the morning of February 1st, her roommates found her bed made unusually neatly, her alarm clock ringing without being turned off, and a streak of blood on her pillow. Linda was gone, just like that. But it wouldn't be long before the list of missing girls would grow. Ted Bundy, meanwhile, was seen by most as someone going places. He was studying psychology, working on a political campaign, and volunteering at a suicide hotline, where he worked side by side with Ann Rule, a former police officer turned crime writer, who would later write the definitive book on him. Ann never suspected a thing. He was polite, thoughtful, smart, charming even. A little reserved, sure, but who isn't? He seemed like someone who was trying hard to do something with his life. That's what made it all so horrifying in hindsight. Because at night, or during the long hours no one could quite account for, Bundy was driving to college campuses, looking for women who looked just a little like each other, long dark hair parted in the middle. His victims, he would later admit, reminded him of a woman from his past, a woman who had broken his heart, and in some twisted corner of his mind, that heartbreak became rage, that rage became violence, and that violence became method. He began using ruses, pretending to need help, wearing a fake arm cast, carrying books or asking for assistance with his car. It gave him a way to get close, to make contact, to seem harmless. And it worked. By June of 1974, the Seattle area was on edge. Multiple women had disappeared with alarming similarities. All were young, attractive, and vanished without a trace. There were no leads, no witnesses, just grieving families, and a growing sense of panic. Then came Lake Sammamish. It was July 14th, 1974, a hot Sunday afternoon, and the park was packed, nearly 40,000 people enjoying the sunshine. Two young women, Janice Ott and Denise Nasland, both disappeared that day, just hours apart. Witnesses finally saw something. A man, attractive, polite, wearing a sling and asking for help loading a sailboat onto his car. He introduced himself by name, Ted. That's when investigators knew something bigger was happening. Someone had gotten sloppy, maybe overconfident. Witnesses described the same man, the same cast, the same approach. For the first time, there was a name, Ted, and yet there were still no arrests. No bodies, just terror. And now, a name echoing through police departments and newspapers. What the public didn't know was that the killer wasn't done, not even close. He was escalating. Bundy had developed a disturbing pattern. After abducting his victims, he would often take them to a secluded area, sometimes days later, to revisit the bodies. He admitted later to returning to the same scenes repeatedly, sometimes applying makeup, brushing their hair, speaking to them. It's the part of the story many people gloss over, because it's hard to even comprehend, but it reveals the depth of his pathology. This wasn't about violence alone, it was about control, fantasy, possession. Meanwhile, he moved. By late 1974, Bundy left Washington behind and relocated to Salt Lake City, Utah, to attend law school, and soon, women began disappearing there too. What's striking is how long Bundy was able to live this double life. In Utah, he attended church, dated women, and even began a new romantic relationship. He introduced himself as a law student, attended social events, and blended in effortlessly. But at night, the mask would slip. He would drive for hours, sometimes into other states, stalking victims and refining his techniques. In October, he abducted Melissa Smith, the daughter of a police chief, then Laura Amy, another young girl. Both were later found murdered, and Bundy by then had already slipped away. It was around this time that a man named Carol Durant changed everything. Carol Durant's story was unlike the others because she survived. On November 8, 1974, at a shopping mall in Murray, Utah, a man approached her, claiming to be a police officer. He said someone had tried to break into her car and asked her to come with him to file a report. She hesitated, but he had a badge. He seemed professional, a little stiff maybe, but not dangerous. Carol got into his car, but something felt off. There was no police radio, no gun, and soon, they weren't heading to the police station at all. When she asked questions, he became evasive. Then he pulled the car over. And that's when the attack began. Carol fought with everything she had. She kicked, scratched, screamed, and somehow managed to escape, running into traffic and flagging down a couple who took her straight to the police. It was the first real break. She described him clearly. She remembered his car, his voice, his look, and with this new lead, detectives would begin connecting the dots across multiple states. The net was tightening, but Bundy wasn't finished. Not yet. And so, the hunt began. Across state lines, detectives were beginning to whisper, could it be the same man? Could this Ted be responsible for disappearances from Washington to Utah? And if so, how much worse was this going to get? In the next chapter, we'll follow the chase, the moment where Bundy's carefully constructed world began to fray. From police lineups to his eventual first arrest, we'll trace the steps that finally brought the smiling killer into custody. But even behind bars, the story was far from over. There was something about the way he looked at people, not just with charm, but calculation. Behind the twinkle in his eyes, there was always a quiet watchfulness. Ted Bundy was constantly measuring, studying, testing boundaries. That's what made him so hard to catch, so easy to trust, and so terrifying to imagine. By the end of 1974, the web of crimes Bundy had spun was starting to unravel, not because of some brilliant slip-up, but because of the smallest thing, a tan Volkswagen Beetle. That car would soon become as iconic as his name. Let's go back to November 1974, just after Carol Durant's narrow escape. Her statement had given Utah investigators something they hadn't had before: a face, a vehicle, and a method. She described a young man, clean-cut, with a fake badge and a phony story. She gave a partial license plate number, and even recalled the beige interior of his car. And that car matched reports from other women in Washington. They had remembered a similar tan VW Bug, seen lingering near college campuses, driven by a man in a sling, or sometimes just watching from a distance. Now, investigators began comparing notes. Bundy, meanwhile, continued trying to live what appeared to be a normal life. He was still dating a local woman named Elizabeth Kendall, who had no idea what he was doing when he left for hours at night. She remembered him as charming, but secretive. He never seemed to sleep. He always had an excuse, and he had a darkness in him, a strange fascination with crime, with control, with manipulation, but she didn't think too much of it. Not at first. That changed when she began hearing news reports about the Utah disappearances, and how they resembled the ones in Washington. She called police. Elizabeth told them about Ted, about his tan beetle, about how he sometimes disappeared for long stretches, how he had crutches once, even though he wasn't hurt, and how he had asked her, almost playfully, how one would go about disposing of a body. It gave investigators a name they'd heard before, Ted. With the pieces slowly falling into place, law enforcement began building a list of suspects. Bundy was on it. But he wasn't alone. He was educated, polite, had no criminal record, and came from a middle-class background. He didn't fit the profile. Still, his name stayed on the radar, especially in Utah. Then came August 16, 1975. In the early morning hours, a Utah Highway Patrol officer spotted a tan VW Bug cruising through a residential neighborhood, headlights off. When the officer pulled the car over, the driver seemed calm, even friendly. It was Ted Bundy. Inside the car, police found an ice pick, a ski mask, rope handcuffs, and a crowbar. Bundy claimed they were for skiing, but there were no skis, no winter gear, and it wasn't ski season. The officer was suspicious, but had no legal reason to arrest him just yet. Still, the incident was reported, and investigators began digging harder. Over the next few weeks, the noose tightened. Eventually, Bundy was arrested on suspicion of attempted kidnapping, specifically for the Carol Duranch case. Police asked Carol to come in and view a lineup. She didn't hesitate. She pointed straight at him. That was the moment Ted Bundy officially became a suspect in a violent crime. He was charged, booked and held on bail, but his calm demeanor never cracked. He insisted he was innocent, confident that he could explain it all away. In fact, when the police searched his apartment, they found little hard evidence. No trophies, no blood, no photos. Bundy was too careful, too organized. He cleaned obsessively. He kept things separate. His academic life, his relationships, and his hidden world of darkness. But they were finally starting to intersect. The trial for the attempted kidnapping began in February 1976. It was small, in a Utah courtroom, but Bundy treated it like a performance. He cross-examined witnesses, challenged evidence, and acted as part of his own defense team. He even smiled at the press, taking on the role of a misunderstood intelligent man wrongfully accused. But the jury didn't buy it. He was convicted and sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. A huge step forward for law enforcement. But what came next was unexpected, because this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. While in custody, Bundy became the focus of a growing multi-state investigation. Detectives from Washington, Colorado, and other areas came to question him, comparing missing persons cases, dates and methods. It was clear now that Bundy's crimes weren't isolated. They spanned states and years. Police soon found a crucial piece of evidence, a hair sample found in Bundy's car, that matched Melissa Smith, one of the Utah victims. Other forensic evidence began stacking up. Bundy was now facing murder charges in Colorado, and was transferred to Aspen to await trial. And that's where things took a turn. Bundy wasn't the kind of inmate who faded into the background. He studied the law obsessively, read court documents, and filed motion after motion. He also observed the weaknesses of the courthouse and jail. One day, during a preliminary hearing, he asked to visit the law library on the second floor of the Aspen courthouse. He was unshackled, left alone, and he jumped. Bundy leapt out a window, 2 stories up, sprained his ankle on landing, and ran into the Colorado wilderness. For 6 days, he remained on the run, stealing food from cabins, evading search teams, and navigating rough terrain. He eventually made his way back into town, disguised himself as a local, and tried to blend in, until he stole a car, and was pulled over by police again. He was caught, but he wasn't done escaping. Back in custody, Bundy was placed in a more secure facility, but by December 1977, he began soaring through the ceiling of his cell with tools he had somehow smuggled in. He dropped weight, greased his body, and crawled into the crawl space above his cell, carefully cutting holes and hiding his work under light fixtures. On New Year's Eve, he made his second successful escape, this time through the ceiling and out the front door of the jail. By the time guards realized he was gone, Bundy had already boarded a bus, changed clothes, and disappeared. This escape wasn't just a jailbreak, it was a warning. Bundy was out, and he was angry. What followed next would become one of the darkest chapters in his story. He fled across the country, eventually landing in Tallahassee, Florida. There, he used stolen IDs, fake names, and remained under the radar until January 15, 1978. At around 3 a.m., he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. What happened that night was brutal. In just 15 minutes, Bundy bludgeoned and assaulted multiple women, killing two, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Livy, and severely injuring others. The attack was chaotic and frenzied. Unlike his earlier crimes, it shocked even experienced investigators. 2 weeks later, Bundy struck again, abducting and murdering 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, a crime that would horrify the nation, but his freedom wouldn't last. In February 1978, a Florida police officer pulled over a suspicious-looking car. Inside, he found a calm, thin man, with stolen plates, fake documents, and a look that felt all too familiar. It was Ted Bundy. The manhunt was over, and this time, he wasn't going anywhere. In the next part, we'll explore the courtroom battles, the media circus, and the chilling details of the Florida trial that would make Bundy a household name, and ultimately seal his fate. When Ted Bundy was finally caught again in February of 1978, something had shifted. He wasn't just a suspect anymore. He was no longer the charming law student or the clever escape artist. Now he was a man linked to dozens of brutal crimes, captured after a nationwide manhunt. But perhaps most importantly, he was about to become a spectacle. Florida would see to that. From the moment Bundy was booked into the Leon County Jail, the media frenzy began. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. News crews jostled for access. Headlines blared the story across the country. The charming killer, the sorority house attacks, the elusive fugitive now caught at last. It was the kind of coverage usually reserved for war zones or movie stars. And in many ways, Bundy leaned into it. He smiled for the cameras. He spoke to the press. He made bold declarations of innocence. He insisted he would represent himself in court. He wasn't just on trial for murder. He was putting on a show, and people couldn't stop watching. The charges were staggering. Bundy faced multiple counts of murder, and attempted murder for the Chi Omega sorority house attack, plus another count of abduction and homicide for the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. The evidence was mounting. Witnesses had seen a man matching Bundy's description near the scene. Bite marks left on Lisa Livy's body were matched to Bundy's teeth. Hair and fibers from the victims were found in his car and apartment. He had driven a stolen vehicle. He carried fake identification. His fingerprints were on key items. Still, Bundy denied everything. He believed, perhaps truly, that he could outwit the justice system one more time. And so began one of the most unusual and high-profile trials in American legal history. The Chi Omega trial began in June of 1979, in Miami. Bundy, dressed in a suit and tie, was calm and confident. He addressed the court with the air of someone playing the lead role in a courtroom drama. He fired and rehired his attorneys multiple times. He insisted on cross-examining witnesses. He argued legal points with the judge. At times it felt more like a bizarre debate club meeting than a capital murder trial, but the facts didn't change. Witnesses recounted hearing screams. Sorority sisters remembered being awakened by thumps, only to find their housemates beaten and bloodied. A crime scene technician described the horror in the bedrooms. The medical examiner presented evidence of blunt force trauma, strangulation, and bite marks. And then came the crucial piece, the forensic odontology. A dentist who had examined the body of Lisa Livy took the stand. He explained the pattern of bite wounds found on her. Then he showed photographs of Bundy's teeth, crooked in a very specific way. They matched. It was one of the earliest and most famous uses of bite mark evidence in a criminal trial. Bundy knew the walls were closing in. He sometimes lashed out in court. Other times, he made strange off-topic speeches. He told reporters that he was being railroaded, but behind closed doors, he was growing increasingly anxious. The charm was still there, but cracks were forming. At one point, he proposed to a woman, Carol Ann Boone, an old flame who had stood by him throughout the trial, right there in the courtroom. It wasn't a stunt. In Florida, at the time, a verbal proposal in court, followed by the woman's acceptance, constituted a legal marriage. And just like that, Ted Bundy had a wife. He smiled. Cameras flashed. The press ate it up, but the jury wasn't impressed. After a 6-week trial, they returned a verdict. Guilty, on all counts. The sentence was swift, death by electrocution. Bundy remained composed, but for the first time, there was fear in his eyes. A year later, Bundy faced trial again, this time in Orlando for the murder of Kimberly Leach. This trial was smaller, less theatrical, but no less devastating. Kimberly had been just 12 years old, a middle school student, bright-eyed and shy. Her body had been found weeks after she vanished, hidden in a pig shed. She had been assaulted and strangled. This time, the emotional toll was greater. Jurors cried. Reporters wept. Even courtroom staff had trouble sitting through the details. Once again, Bundy was convicted. Once again, the sentence was death. He now had 2 death penalties hanging over his head, and very few ways out. But Bundy wasn't done trying. Over the next 9 years, Ted Bundy played the long game. He filed appeal after appeal. He gave interviews. He offered up information about other killers. He dangled the possibility of helping solve crimes, hoping for delays in his execution. At one point, he even claimed he could help locate the bodies of missing victims, if only the courts would give him more time. Some law enforcement officials met with him. They wanted closure for the families. Bundy gave vague directions, half confessions, and incomplete maps. It was hard to tell what was true, and what was another trick. Meanwhile, the public grew restless. Victims' families begged for justice. Politicians began pushing back on endless delays in death penalty cases. By 1989, time had run out. Ted Bundy's execution was scheduled for January 24, 1989, at Florida State Prison. In the final days, Bundy granted a series of interviews to psychologists and religious leaders. He spoke more openly about his crimes than ever before, not in detail, but in tone. He admitted to being driven by violent fantasies. He blamed pornography. He claimed to feel remorse, but many believed it was too little, too late. Outside the prison on the day of the execution, a crowd of hundreds gathered. Some held signs that read "Burn Bundy Burn," others cheered. A few mourned the lives lost, the pain inflicted, the years wasted. At 7:06 a.m., Bundy was led to the electric chair. He was strapped in. A black mask was placed over his face, and with a final surge of electricity, it was over. The world had finally said goodbye to Ted Bundy, but the legacy he left behind, the terror, the questions, the fascination, still echoes today. In the next part, we'll begin unpacking Bundy's psychology, what drove him, what signs were missed, and how someone so outwardly normal could harbor such darkness within. The story of Ted Bundy doesn't end at his execution. In many ways, that's where the deeper questions begin. What makes a man like Bundy? How does someone move through society with such ease, hiding a monstrous inner world behind a polished smile and a firm handshake? How did he become a killer so calculating, yet still capable of blending into the crowd? To begin understanding this, we must go back, not to the crime scenes, but to the beginning. To the boy who would become a man who would become a monster. It all starts in Burlington, Vermont, on November 24, 1946. Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Kalb, to a young unmarried woman named Eleanor Lewis Kalb. In the mid-1940s, it was still considered deeply shameful to have a child out of wedlock, so Eleanor gave birth at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers, quietly, without the support of the baby's father, a man who, to this day, remains a mystery. Shortly after his birth, Ted was brought to Philadelphia, where he was raised by his grandparents, and led to believe that his mother was actually his sister. This family secret would linger in the background for years, unspoken but ever present, and it's just the first in a long line of psychological threads that continue to spark debate among experts. When he was 4 years old, Eleanor took Ted and moved to Tacoma, Washington, to start over. There she met a man named Johnny Culpepper Bundy, a hospital cook. They married, and Ted took his stepfather's last name, but Ted never fully accepted Johnny. He saw him as beneath him, uneducated, unrefined, and unworthy of respect. From a young age, Ted developed a quiet, judgmental streak. He could be polite, but distant, engaging but guarded, and he liked to be in control. He also began to exhibit signs of social disconnection, an ability to mimic emotion without necessarily feeling it. Friends and teachers described him as bright, well-mannered, and somewhat aloof. He had a knack for getting by, but something always seemed off. As Ted entered adolescence, that mask of normalcy remained firmly in place. He did well in school, though not exceptionally. He was often described as charming, the kind of boy who helped elderly neighbors shovel their sidewalks, or offered to carry groceries for strangers. But under that clean-cut exterior, his inner world was growing darker. According to later interviews and psychological reports, Bundy began stealing, voyeurism, and fantasizing about violence during his teen years. He peered through windows at women undressing. He stole things he didn't need. He imagined overpowering people, particularly women, but told no one. He also became fascinated by detective stories, especially ones involving murder and crime scene investigations. This is common in many young people, of course, but in Bundy's case, it wasn't just curiosity, it was preparation. Bundy wasn't merely fascinated with the idea of getting caught. He was fascinated with how not to. By the time he entered college, Bundy had begun constructing the image of the person he wanted to be. He enrolled at the University of Puget Sound, before transferring to the University of Washington, where he studied psychology. His professors described him as articulate and highly intelligent. He dressed neatly. He spoke clearly. He volunteered at a suicide hotline, and no one had any idea of what lay beneath the surface. But something shifted again in 1969. Bundy fell in love with a classmate, a young woman known publicly only by the pseudonym Stephanie Brooks. She was everything Ted wanted: elegant, wealthy, refined. She came from a privileged background that Ted admired and envied. Their relationship was intense, but ultimately fell apart. She broke up with him, reportedly because he lacked ambition and direction. The rejection hit him hard. Some believe it was a pivotal moment, that Stephanie became a blueprint for the women he would later target. Tall, dark hair, parted in the middle, a specific look that repeated again and again in Bundy's victims. Ted took it personally, devastatingly so, but he didn't confront her. He didn't lash out publicly. Instead, he began to reinvent himself. After the breakup, Bundy poured himself into self-improvement. He became more polished, more driven. He re-enrolled in school, this time as a law student. He worked on political campaigns. He even reconnected with Stephanie. And this time, when she fell for him again, he abruptly ended the relationship, just to prove he could. It was calculated, cold, and it hinted at the disturbing psychology that had begun to take root inside him. Around this time, young women began disappearing. It started in Washington and Oregon, then in Utah, then in Colorado, all college-age women, all with dark hair, parted in the middle, all vanishing without a trace. And still no one suspected Ted Bundy. It's worth noting how extraordinary that is. Bundy was living a life of duality, a respected student and volunteer by day, and something far more sinister by night. He understood how people saw him. He knew what was expected, and he used it all to his advantage. He avoided suspicion by becoming the least likely suspect. He appeared helpful, intelligent, respectful. He even wore a fake arm cast, or used crutches to appear vulnerable when luring victims to his car. It wasn't brute force that made him dangerous. It was manipulation. Bundy had learned how to read people, how to exploit trust, how to mimic kindness and vulnerability to disarm his targets. And all the while, he was refining his methods. One of the most haunting details about Bundy's crimes is how methodical they became. He selected victims carefully. He often returned to crime scenes, sometimes to move or reposition bodies. He left very little evidence behind, and he frequently changed locations, making it harder for investigators to connect the dots. In some cases, he kept trophies, items of clothing, jewelry, or photographs. In others, he would take his victims to remote wooded areas and dispose of them with chilling precision. There's a detachment in this kind of violence, a calmness. It wasn't frenzied or impulsive, it was calculated. This wasn't just about killing, it was about control. In psychology, there's a concept known as the mask of sanity. It's the ability of someone, often a sociopath, to appear entirely normal while hiding deeply abnormal thoughts or behavior. Bundy wore that mask perfectly. He had no criminal record, no glaring signs of mental illness. He didn't fit the stereotype of a serial killer, and that's why he got away with so much for so long. His success wasn't due to genius, though he was clever. It was due to our expectations of evil. We look for the strange, the unstable, the outwardly dangerous. Bundy was none of those things, and that's exactly why he was so dangerous. In the next part, we'll look more closely at the early investigation, the clues that went unnoticed, the victims who were never found, and how law enforcement eventually began to see the pattern forming.
By the early 1970s, a quiet fear had started to take hold across the Pacific Northwest. It was subtle at first. Missing person reports here and there, flyers on college bulletin boards, rumors of young women who never came home. But over time, the pattern became harder to ignore. These weren't random disappearances. They were methodical. The victims were almost always young white women, slim, attractive, with long brown hair, usually parted in the middle. They vanished in broad daylight, sometimes in public places, sometimes just steps from their front doors. There were no signs of struggle, no suspects, no bodies, just silence. And as the list of the missing began to grow, so did the sense of unease. In 1974, the terror deepened. That January, Linda Ann Healy, a 21-year-old University of Washington student, failed to show up for work at a local radio station. Her roommates thought little of it at first. Maybe she had overslept or gone out early, but when they entered her room, the scene was unsettling. Her bed was neatly made, her pillow and blankets were clean, but beneath the comforter was something strange. A dark red stain on the mattress, blood, and her nightgown, also blood-stained, was balled up near the head of the bed. Linda was gone. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no screams were heard in the night. It was as if someone had come into the room and taken her without waking the rest of the house, and that someone knew exactly what they were doing. Over the next 6 months, the disappearances continued, each one a little bolder than the last. In March, Donna Gail Manson, a 19-year-old student from Evergreen State College, vanished while walking to a concert on campus. In April, Susan Elaine Rancourt, 18, disappeared from Central Washington State College after attending a meeting. In May, 2 more women, Roberta Kathleen Parks and Brenda Carroll Ball, were reported missing from separate colleges. They had all vanished without a trace. Police departments from different counties and even different states were now facing a chilling question. Were these cases connected? Some detectives began comparing notes. The timelines were similar. The victim profiles were nearly identical. And then there were the witness reports, vague but eerily similar. Several young women mentioned being approached by a man with a broken arm, asking for help carrying books or loading something into his car. The man was described as handsome, polite, and clean-cut. He introduced himself simply as Ted. Then came Lake Sammamish. It was July 14, 1974, a sunny Sunday afternoon in Washington State. The park was crowded. Families barbecued. Children splashed in the water. Couples walked hand in hand along the shoreline. And in the span of just a few hours, 2 young women disappeared. First, Janice Ott, a 23-year-old probation caseworker. She left her towel on the beach and walked off with a man who needed help loading a sailboat onto his car. Then later that day, Denise Nasland, 19, told her boyfriend she was heading to the restroom. She never came back. Witnesses remembered the man clearly. He wore a white cast. He spoke with a slight accent. He was confident, friendly, even charming, and most importantly, he introduced himself to multiple people throughout the day, always as Ted. For the first time, authorities had a name. That August, police released a composite sketch and issued a public plea for help. The case now had national attention. Newspapers ran the story on the front page. Television anchors used terms like serial killer, still a relatively new phrase in American crime reporting. Tips poured in, thousands of them. Among those who called the tip line was a woman named Ann Rule. She was a former police officer and crime writer. But more significantly, she had once worked with Ted Bundy at a Seattle crisis hotline center. She told detectives she recognized the sketch. She also said she found it hard to believe. Bundy was clean-cut, educated, polite. He had worked beside her, helping desperate callers through mental health crises. He had never raised suspicions, and yet she couldn't ignore the similarities. Neither could his former girlfriend, Elizabeth Klopfer. She had also noticed strange behavior. Ted disappearing for days without explanation, keeping items in his apartment that didn't belong to him, and sometimes driving long distances for no reason. She told police everything she knew. Still, Bundy remained free. In Utah, the pattern began again. Bundy had enrolled in law school at the University of Utah and moved to Salt Lake City that fall. And soon, young women in the area began disappearing, just like in Washington. In October, Melissa Smith, the daughter of a local police chief, vanished. Her body was found 9 days later, raped and strangled. In November, Laura Aim disappeared after leaving a cafe. Her remains were discovered weeks later, in a nearby canyon. The attacks were accelerating. The killer was becoming bolder, more brutal, and still, police had no solid leads. That changed in August 1975. It was a routine traffic stop that finally brought Ted Bundy under the microscope. A Utah Highway Patrol officer noticed a suspicious tan Volkswagen Beetle cruising through a residential neighborhood late at night, with its headlights off. The driver seemed nervous. When asked for ID, he stammered. When asked where he was going, he offered a vague answer. The officer searched the car. Inside, he found what would later be known as Bundy's murder kit: a ski mask, rope, handcuffs, a crowbar, a flashlight with the lens removed, and an ice pick. Bundy claimed he used the items for skiing. The officer wasn't convinced. He arrested Bundy on suspicion of burglary, but investigators were already starting to make connections. Police in Salt Lake City soon realized they had Ted Bundy. the same name that had surfaced in Washington after the Lake Sammamish disappearances. They began digging deeper. They spoke with his professors, ex-girlfriends, co-workers. They searched his apartment. They matched his car to descriptions given by witnesses. They gathered fibers and hairs found inside. And then in October 1975, Bundy was placed in a lineup for a kidnapping case. The abduction of Carol Durant, a young woman who had escaped from a man pretending to be a police officer. She identified Bundy immediately. He was charged with aggravated kidnapping, and for the first time, the facade of Ted Bundy, the clean-cut student, the helpful friend, began to crumble. By early 1976, he was convicted and sentenced to serve up to 15 years in prison. But this was just the beginning. Detectives from multiple states now had reason to believe he was connected to dozens of murders across the country. Bundy was facing a tidal wave of legal trouble, and he knew it. So, in classic Bundy fashion, he began plotting his next move. In 1977, while being transferred to a courthouse in Colorado for a hearing in one of the murder cases, Bundy escaped from custody. He jumped from a second-story window and vanished into the mountains for 8 days before being recaptured. Just 6 months later, he escaped again, this time from jail itself. He dropped through a ceiling vent, climbed into a janitor's closet, and walked out of the building dressed as a staff member. By the time anyone noticed he was gone, Ted Bundy had already crossed state lines. And within weeks, he would kill again. In the next part, we'll follow Bundy's final crime spree, a series of attacks that shocked Florida and led to his ultimate capture. We'll also explore how his bold escape exposed the gaps in the justice system and brought a nation face to face with evil it wasn't prepared to comprehend. When Ted Bundy escaped from jail the second time, it wasn't a dramatic burst through locked doors or a frenzied run past armed guards. It was quiet, methodical, just as he had always been. In December 1977, while held at the Garfield County Jail in Colorado, Bundy had been losing weight deliberately, about 30 pounds, so he could wriggle through a small hole in the ceiling of his cell. Over weeks, he had soared into the light fixture, hidden books and pillows under his blanket to make it look like he was asleep, and studied the jail's layout in silence. On the night of his escape, Ted waited until everything was still. He climbed up through the ceiling, dropped into the jailer's apartment, unoccupied at the time, and walked out the front door. No alarms, no guards, no struggle. He simply vanished. By the time anyone discovered he was gone, Bundy was already hundreds of miles away. He first fled to Denver, then made his way to Chicago, and eventually to Tallahassee, Florida, arriving there in early January 1978. He used stolen credit cards to survive, slipped into the local scene unnoticed, and adopted a new name, Chris Hagen. At first it looked like Bundy might keep a low profile, but that wasn't his nature. The darkness inside him hadn't dulled with time. In fact, it had only grown more brazen. He had already committed unspeakable acts. But what he did next would shock the nation and leave even seasoned investigators speechless. On the early morning of January 15, 1978, just after 3 a.m., Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. He didn't break in. The door had been left unlocked, something that wasn't uncommon in a sleepy college town. He moved through the house like a shadow, completely unnoticed. Inside, young women were asleep in their rooms. What happened next was savage. Bundy attacked 4 women in less than 15 minutes. He bludgeoned and strangled Margaret Bowman, 21, with a piece of firewood. He then entered the room of Lisa Levy, 20, where he sexually assaulted and beat her, biting her deeply on her body. She died from her injuries. He moved on to Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner, brutally attacking both. But a car's headlights flashed through a nearby window, startling him. He fled before finishing the job. Both Chandler and Kleiner survived, injured, but alive. Their testimony later would help convict him. In a matter of minutes, Bundy had committed one of the most violent mass attacks on a college campus in U.S. history. But he wasn't finished. Just weeks later, on February 9, 1978, Bundy struck again. This time, his victim was 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, a 7th grader from Lake City, Florida. She was last seen by classmates as she was walking to her homeroom. She never arrived. Her body was found weeks later, hidden beneath a pig shed in a rural area. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered. This crime, more than any other, would seal Ted Bundy's fate. A young girl, a school setting, an act of calculated brutality. Even among the long list of his horrors, Kimberly's murder stood out as the most chilling. By now a massive manhunt was underway. Bundy, still going by the name Chris Hagen, had been drifting. He stole another car, a Volkswagen Beetle, ironically, and drove aimlessly through Florida, low on money and increasingly paranoid. On February 15, 1978, fate caught up with him. A Pensacola police officer named David Lee noticed a suspicious vehicle parked near a house. When he ran the plates, they came back stolen. As Lee approached, the man inside took off running. A brief struggle followed. During the arrest, Bundy kicked and flailed. At one point he shouted, "I wish you had killed me." Once he was in custody, police found stolen IDs, stolen credit cards, and suspicious items in the car. He refused to give his real name, still trying to play the part of Chris Hagen, but soon enough, fingerprints confirmed the truth. Ted Bundy, America's most wanted man, had been caught. Again, this time he wouldn't escape. With Bundy finally in custody, Florida prepared to put him on trial. Unlike previous states, Florida was determined to seek the death penalty. There would be no loopholes, no leniency. The trial for the Chi Omega murders began in June 1979 in Miami. It became one of the first trials in U.S. history to be nationally televised, and the entire country tuned in. People watched not just out of horror, but out of fascination. Here was a man accused of monstrous crimes, yet he stood in court in a suit and tie, charming the media, smiling for the cameras, and even representing himself as his own legal counsel. Bundy cross-examined witnesses. He delivered opening statements. At one point, in a move that stunned everyone, he proposed marriage to his longtime supporter and former girlfriend, Carol Ann Boone, in open court, during the penalty phase. Because of a strange Florida law, when she said yes, and a judge acknowledged it, they were legally married on the spot. It was surreal, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. In the Chi Omega case, Bundy left behind bite marks on Lisa Levy's body. A forensic odontologist matched the bite pattern to Bundy's teeth, a relatively new kind of forensic evidence at the time, but one considered reliable. In addition, survivors Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler testified about their attacks. Witnesses placed Bundy near the sorority house, and police connected items found in his car to various crimes. On July 24, 1979, Ted Bundy was found guilty of first-degree murder for the Chi Omega killings and attempted murders. He was sentenced to death by electrocution, but that was only the beginning. A second trial followed, for the murder of Kimberly Leach. This time, prosecutors didn't rely on forensic evidence. They relied on witness testimony, fiber evidence, and circumstantial links. The jury deliberated for less than 7 hours. Bundy was again found guilty, and he received a second death sentence. For many, justice had been served. But for Ted Bundy, the drama didn't end in the courtroom. During his death row years, he gave multiple interviews. He spoke with journalists, psychologists, and even law enforcement officials. His goal: delay his execution by making himself useful. He began confessing to murders, slowly, strategically, hoping to trade information for more time. He admitted to over 30 murders across 7 states. But he hinted there were more. Some law enforcement officials believed the number could be as high as 100. He described how he lured women by pretending to be injured, using a fake cast or crutches, how he attacked them, how he disposed of the bodies. At times, his confessions were chillingly calm, clinical. Others were vague, inconsistent, or deliberately evasive. Some believe he never told the full truth. Perhaps he couldn't. Or perhaps he didn't want to. In his final days, Bundy tried to shift blame. In a now infamous interview with Christian psychologist Dr. James Dobson, Bundy claimed that violent pornography played a major role in his crimes. He warned about its influence, presenting himself as a man corrupted by dark forces. To many, it felt like one last attempt to manipulate the narrative, a desperate bid to control how history would remember him. But the victims' families weren't interested in his excuses. On January 24, 1989, after nearly a decade of legal appeals and delays, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. He was 42 years old. Outside the prison, crowds gathered, cheering and waving signs. Some chanted, "Burn Bundy, burn." Others lit fireworks. It was a grim celebration, but for many it marked the end of a nightmare. A monster had finally been put to rest. In the next part we'll explore the lasting impact of Ted Bundy's crimes, how they changed forensic science, how they affected the victims' families, and how Bundy's legacy continues to haunt popular culture and the criminal justice system alike. With Ted Bundy's execution in 1989, the country exhaled, but the shadow he cast lingered. His crimes weren't just statistics or distant events tucked away in newspaper archives. They left deep scars on families, communities, and the very way America thought about safety, psychology, and justice. Bundy's story was one of extremes, a man who appeared clean-cut, intelligent, and even charismatic, but who had committed unspeakable acts of cruelty. His life and crimes forced the public to reconcile with an uncomfortable truth, that evil could wear a friendly face. But his legacy didn't end with his death. In many ways, it was just beginning. In the immediate aftermath of his execution, attention turned to the victims. Families who had lived for years with the slow drip of court hearings and legal delays now faced a different kind of silence. Justice had been served, but it didn't bring their daughters back. For the families of women like Kimberly Leach, Lisa Levy, and Margaret Bowman, there were no words that could make the pain vanish. Many of them spoke publicly in the days following the execution, not with celebration, but with quiet dignity. Some expressed relief, others expressed sorrow, but nearly all spoke of hope that no other family would ever have to endure what they had. For some, the end of Bundy's life reopened old wounds. Details from his final interviews were broadcast on television and published in newspapers. His confessions, which had been drip-fed to investigators in the hopes of stalling his execution, rehashed trauma that families had tried for years to lay to rest. But through this, a new movement was born, one rooted in advocacy, in memory, and in changing the systems that had allowed Bundy to thrive for so long. One of the first major shifts that emerged from the Bundy case was a deeper public awareness of forensic psychology. While criminal profiling had existed before, Bundy's case helped solidify the value of understanding the mind of a killer. Investigators had long struggled to describe what made Bundy tick. He wasn't insane in the traditional sense. He didn't fit the classic image of a disheveled man talking to himself on a street corner. Instead, he blended in. He was educated. He used big words. He smiled in court. He had supporters who believed he was innocent until the bitter end. But behind that mask, psychologists found something chilling. Bundy was often described as having antisocial personality disorder, a condition marked by a lack of empathy, manipulation, and a disregard for the rights of others. Some experts believed he was a malignant narcissist, obsessed with control, incapable of remorse, and desperate for admiration. He wasn't driven by passion or rage. He was driven by power, that need to dominate, to own his victims, even after death, emerged time and again in interviews. Bundy admitted to returning to crime scenes, engaging in acts of necrophilia, and posing the bodies of victims. He wanted to control not just life, but death itself. Understanding this mindset helped pave the way for more accurate criminal profiling in future cases. Another legacy of the Bundy case was in the world of forensic evidence. One of the key moments in his trial was the use of bite mark analysis, matching the impressions found on Lisa Levy's body to Bundy's teeth. At the time, this kind of evidence was considered groundbreaking. It showed that physical evidence, when carefully preserved and analyzed, could speak louder than testimony. Although bite mark evidence has since become controversial and debated in legal circles, the broader message stuck: forensic science matters. Bundy's case helped inspire greater investment in DNA analysis, evidence collection protocols, and laboratory standards. It also reinforced the importance of interstate cooperation in criminal investigations. Bundy had committed crimes across multiple states, from Washington to Utah, to Colorado to Florida. For a long time, these jurisdictions weren't talking to each other. By the time connections were made, Bundy had already escaped jail twice. His case became a rallying cry for better communication between law enforcement agencies. Databases were updated. Systems were created to track serial offenders more effectively. In many ways, the modern infrastructure of the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, owes its existence to the failures seen in the Bundy investigation. But perhaps one of the most lasting and personal legacies of the case was seen in victim advocacy. Many of the families affected by Bundy's crimes became vocal champions of victims' rights. They lobbied for changes in sentencing laws, parole eligibility, and victim compensation programs. They told their stories in public forums and legislative chambers. Some states like Florida and Washington created new initiatives aimed at helping victims' families navigate the legal system. Others re-evaluated how they supported families during long traumatic trials. In the years following Bundy's execution, a greater emphasis was placed on treating victims with dignity, not just in the courtroom but in the public eye. Gone were the days when victims were referred to only by initials, or described solely by the circumstances of their deaths. Instead, the movement began to reclaim their identities. They were students, daughters, sisters, athletes, musicians, future nurses and lawyers, lives that had mattered long before they became headlines. Bundy's crimes also seeped into popular culture in ways few other criminal cases have, from books and documentaries to movies and podcasts. The fascination with Bundy has never quite gone away. He has been portrayed by actors like Mark Harmon, Cary Elwes, and most recently, Zac Efron in the 2019 film Extremely Wicked, shockingly evil and vile. These portrayals have sparked ongoing debates. Does media coverage risk glorifying the killer, or is it a necessary tool to educate the public about the warning signs of predatory behavior? Some argue that Bundy's charm was overemphasized in these retellings, turning him into a morbid celebrity, rather than the brutal murderer he was. Others point out that understanding his deception is key to preventing future tragedies. Regardless of where one stands, it's clear that Bundy became a symbol of both horror and fascination. His story tapped into deep societal fears, that someone who looks normal could harbor monstrous secrets, that appearances can lie, that evil doesn't always come wearing a mask. It can smile, shake your hand and offer to carry your groceries. In schools, criminal justice programs, and police academies, Bundy's case is still studied today, not because he was exceptional in his intelligence. Despite popular belief, his IQ wasn't extraordinarily high. Not because he was handsome, beauty is subjective, and not even because of the number of his crimes, though that number is horrifying. Ted Bundy is studied because he used perception as a weapon. He knew how to exploit expectations, he knew how to mimic empathy, and he knew how to navigate a society that often assumes monsters will be easy to spot. His legacy then is one of caution. Caution about how we judge people. Caution about who we trust. And caution about letting charisma override critical thinking. But as with any dark chapter in history, Bundy's story isn't just about the killer. It's about the people who stopped him. The detectives who pieced together leads across hundreds of miles. The survivors who bravely testified. The families who stood tall in court. The journalists who dug for the truth.
The experts who refined forensic methods, and the millions of people who said consciously or not, this will never happen again. In the next part we'll revisit the survivors. The women who escaped Bundy's grasp, who rebuilt their lives, and whose voices have helped shape a better understanding of violence, recovery and resilience. Their stories, often overshadowed by Bundy's infamy, deserve to be heard fully and with compassion. When people speak of serial killers, it's easy to become trapped in the darkness of their crimes. The details, the horror, the confusion. Ted Bundy, perhaps more than any other, seems to pull focus away from the stories that matter most. The people who survived him, the women who escaped, the lives he couldn't extinguish, and the courage they showed, then and now. Because while Bundy's crimes were grotesque and seemingly endless, they weren't without resistance. Not all of his targets fell silently into the night. Some lived, some ran, some fought back, and by doing so they not only saved their own lives but helped build the case that would bring him down. Their voices are a critical part of the story, and today we listen to them. Let's start with Carol Durant. In November 1974, Carol was an 18-year-old high school student living in Murray, Utah. She had plans like any other teenager, classes, friends, maybe a future in fashion design. But on the afternoon of November 8th, her ordinary day took a terrifying turn. Carol was approached by a man at the Fashion Place Mall. He introduced himself as a police officer, Officer Roseland, he claimed. He told her that someone had attempted to break into her car, and that he needed her to come to the station to file a report. He was polite, authoritative, and persistent. Carol felt uneasy but followed him into the parking lot where a tan Volkswagen Beetle awaited. Once she was inside, the illusion began to unravel. There was no radio, no badge, no patrol, no station. The doors locked. As the car drove in the wrong direction, her instincts kicked in. Bundy pulled over and attempted to handcuff her, but she fought back. He got one cuff on her left wrist before she managed to wrench open the passenger door and throw herself onto the pavement. She screamed, kicked and wrestled until a passing couple pulled over to help. Bundy sped off, and Carol was left shaken, but alive. Her escape gave police one of their first solid leads. She remembered the car. She described the attacker, and later she would stand in court and identify Ted Bundy face to face. Her bravery not only saved her own life, it became a cornerstone in the case against him. Carol wasn't the only one who slipped through Bundy's grasp. There was also Rhonda Stapley, a pharmacy student at the University of Utah. In October 1974, Rhonda missed her bus after a dental appointment. As she waited, a man pulled up in a VW Beetle and offered her a ride. She hesitated, then accepted. He seemed polite, even charming. But as the car turned away from the expected route, dread settled in. She remembers him whispering, "You know what? I'm going to kill you." Bundy attacked her, strangled her and pushed her over the edge of a ravine. But somehow Rhonda survived. She lay still until he left, then climbed back up to safety. For years she told no one. Like many survivors, she carried the trauma silently, worried that no one would believe her, or that she might be blamed. It wasn't until decades later that Rhonda came forward. Her story, told in interviews and documentaries, adds another layer to Bundy's known attacks, and to the resilience of the women who endured his violence and lived to tell the tale. These survivors are not just footnotes. They are the living counterpoint to Bundy's legacy. They remind us that resistance is possible, that survival, even in the face of unimaginable fear,
is a story worth telling.
And their bravery didn't end with survival. It extended into the courtroom. Bundy's trials were unlike anything the American public had seen before. Cameras in the courtroom, spectators lining the bench, a defendant who chose to represent himself, questioning witnesses, performing for the press. And there, standing under fluorescent lights, were the women he had attacked. forced to relive their trauma in excruciating detail. Carol Durant testified in both the Utah kidnapping trial
and again in Florida during Bundy's appeal process.
She described the car, the cuffs, the panic. Her voice, calm but resolute, helped humanize the horror. She wasn't a statistic. She was a survivor. And each time she spoke, the mask Bundy wore began to slip. These survivors also helped crack the psychological puzzle of Bundy. Unlike many criminals, Bundy seemed to pick victims based on a specific type. Young white women, long brown hair parted in the middle, college students. There was something chillingly deliberate about it. Some psychologists theorize he was targeting a version of Stephanie Brooks, his college girlfriend who had once broken his heart. Others believe it was simply a type that made him feel powerful. But in cases like Carol's and Rhonda's, we see a different pattern. They fought back. They didn't fit into the narrative he was building for himself. And in doing so, they helped unravel it.
Over time, the stories of survivors have gained more attention. Books like The Phantom Prince by Elizabeth Kendall, Bundy's longtime girlfriend, offered personal, heartbreaking insight into the dual lives he led. Kendall's daughter Molly also came forward to share her memories of growing up with Bundy in their home. Imagine that a serial killer helping with homework, making dinner, playing the role of loving boyfriend and father figure. It sounds like fiction, but it wasn't. And for women like Elizabeth and Molly, reconciling the man they knew with the monster he became has taken a lifetime. Their stories, like those of Carol and Rhonda, offer a fuller, more human perspective. They show the psychological toll Bundy left behind, not just in terms of crime, but in the confusion, the betrayal, and the decades of emotional reckoning. Survivors also play a vital role in education. Today, many speak at universities, women's shelters, and law enforcement seminars. They use their experiences to advocate for safety awareness, mental health support, and more compassionate responses to victims of violence. Their message is clear: listen to your instincts. Speak up when something feels wrong, and never assume that danger has a specific face. They are, in every sense, advocates, not only for justice, but for the dignity and strength of survivors everywhere. In many ways, it is the survivors, not the killer, who define the true legacy of this case. Ted Bundy took many lives, but he couldn't silence every voice. The women who escaped him, physically or emotionally, help ensure that we remember not just the horror, but the humanity. They remind us that real strength is quiet. It shows up in courtrooms, on stages, and in whispered conversations years after the fact. It shows up in healing. And perhaps that's the most important takeaway of all. Bundy sought control, power, dominance. But in the end, it's the survivors who reclaimed the narrative, who remind us that evil may leave scars, but it does not get the final word. In the next part, we'll shift focus to the people who hunted Ted Bundy, the investigators, detectives, and police officers who painstakingly pieced together his crimes across multiple states. We'll follow their journey through false leads, missed opportunities, and ultimate justice. Behind every manhunt, every capture, and every trial, there are countless hours of work by people who rarely make headlines: detectives, police officers, forensic specialists, and everyday citizens who refused to let a monster roam free. Ted Bundy's capture wasn't just luck or chance. It was the result of tireless investigation across multiple states, clever detective work, and a growing network of communication between law enforcement agencies, something that was still relatively new in the 1970s. The case began to gain momentum in Utah, where Bundy's violent behavior was becoming more apparent. When Carol Durant escaped and reported her attack, it was a key turning point. Detective Harold Nye was one of the first to investigate these crimes in Utah. He described Bundy as calm, cool, and polite during interviews, a man who seemed almost ordinary on the surface. But Nye also knew something wasn't right. Bundy's charm masked a coldness that was difficult to detect until more evidence came to light. Soon after Carol's attack, police began linking a series of disappearances and assaults across Utah and Colorado. But Bundy was always one step ahead. He was careful.
He planned. He changed states, hopping across Washington, Oregon, Utah and Colorado to avoid detection. This tactic made it difficult for investigators, who were still developing the idea of cross-jurisdictional task forces. Still, officers like Nye knew the patterns. They started to piece together descriptions, witness accounts, and the infamous Volkswagen Beetle. They shared files and coordinated in ways that had rarely been done before. One of the most pivotal moments in the investigation came in 1975, when Bundy was arrested in Utah for a traffic violation. He had been driving a stolen car, and the police found burglary tools in the vehicle. This led to his arrest for kidnapping Carol Duranch. At this point, the net was tightening. Bundy was held in Utah's jail, facing charges that could put him behind bars. But Bundy's mind was still sharp. He wasn't finished yet. In a stunning move, Bundy managed to escape custody. Not once, but twice. The first escape happened in June 1977. Bundy jumped from a second-floor courthouse window in Aspen, Colorado. He injured his ankle but fled into the surrounding mountains. For 6 days he eluded a massive manhunt before being recaptured. His ability to slip away shocked law enforcement and raised the stakes for everyone involved. Bundy's second escape was even more daring. In December 1977, while awaiting trial in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, he slipped out of the jail by crawling through a hole he had chipped away in the ceiling of his cell. For weeks he vanished. This time Bundy traveled south to Florida. He began a new killing spree, showing how terrifyingly adaptable and dangerous he was. The Florida murders would ultimately lead to his final arrest and conviction. Detectives there, particularly Jim Browning, were critical to tracking him down. Browning was a seasoned investigator who quickly recognized the pattern and knew they were dealing with the same predator terrorizing the western states. When Bundy was pulled over for a routine traffic stop in Pensacola in February 1978, the officers initially suspected he was intoxicated. But once his identity was confirmed and police linked him to the Florida disappearances, it was clear the nightmare was far from over. What followed was a tense and dramatic court battle in Florida, where Bundy would face charges for the murders of several young women, including the brutal attacks on sorority house residents at Florida State University. The investigation had been a massive multi-state effort involving interviews, forensics, and painstaking evidence collection. Each piece of evidence, each witness testimony, pushed Bundy closer to justice. The law enforcement officers involved were not immune to the toll the case took. Many spoke of long nights reviewing reports, making hundreds of calls and chasing down every lead, no matter how small. They faced frustration too, false tips, dead ends, and the pressure of public fear. Yet they pressed on. Their persistence meant the survivors and families of victims could begin to hope for closure. The investigation also sparked improvements in law enforcement techniques. Bundy's case highlighted the need for better communication between states and agencies, leading to more coordinated efforts in tracking serial offenders. The FBI became more involved, pioneering profiling techniques that have since helped capture countless criminals. Ted Bundy's capture is a reminder that behind every headline, there are dedicated people working quietly to make the world safer. Detectives like Nye and Browning, along with countless others, refused to give up. They faced a criminal unlike any they had seen before, charming, manipulative, intelligent and deadly, but their dedication brought him to justice. In the next part, we will explore the trials themselves, the intense courtroom drama, Bundy's decision to defend himself, and the impact of those hearings on American criminal justice. Ted Bundy's trials were unlike any the American criminal justice system had seen before. They were filled with tension, drama, and chilling moments that kept the entire nation watching. But perhaps the most striking aspect was Bundy himself, confident, articulate, and daring to take control of his own defense. Bundy's decision to represent himself in court shocked many. Most defendants rely on experienced lawyers to navigate the complexities of legal battles, but Bundy was convinced he could manipulate the courtroom as skillfully as he had manipulated his victims. His charm and intelligence were on full display during the trials, where he cross-examined witnesses and questioned evidence with an unsettling calm. One of the most famous moments came during the trial for the Florida murders, where Bundy defended himself against accusations of the brutal attacks on two sorority house residents. The prosecution presented powerful evidence, including eyewitness testimony and forensic analysis. Despite the overwhelming case, Bundy's self-representation turned the trial into a spectacle. His articulate speech and courtroom tactics kept the jury and public riveted, a reminder that beneath the menace was a deeply manipulative mind. However, Bundy's bravado couldn't mask the horrific nature of his crimes. Witnesses gave emotional accounts, and medical experts detailed the savage injuries inflicted on the victims. The evidence was clear and compelling. The jury had to weigh the contrast between Bundy's smooth demeanor and the brutal reality behind the charges. Throughout the proceedings, Bundy maintained a cold, almost detached presence. At times he appeared to relish the attention, even charming reporters and courtroom observers. But there were also moments when his mask slipped. The gravity of his situation seemed to settle in, revealing brief flashes of vulnerability or frustration. The trials lasted for months, with Bundy facing multiple charges across different counties. The legal battle was exhausting for everyone involved: the victims' families, the prosecution, the defense, and the court staff. Yet the determination to see justice served never wavered. The final verdicts were unanimous. Bundy was found guilty on all counts, including multiple murders and attempted kidnappings. The court sentenced him to death, a punishment that was both a relief and a chilling reminder of the horror he had wrought. The trials changed the way America viewed serial killers. Bundy's ability to manipulate the courtroom challenged assumptions about criminal behavior and justice. They also highlighted the importance of victims' voices and the painstaking work required to bring such criminals to justice. Beyond the legal drama, the trials left a lasting mark on law enforcement practices, court procedures, and public awareness about violent crime. They sparked conversations about the psychology of killers, the rights of the accused, and the impact of media coverage on legal processes. As the court proceedings concluded, many wondered about Bundy's true nature. Was he a monster born or made? Was his charm a carefully constructed facade hiding a darker truth? The trials didn't answer all these questions, but they exposed the terrifying reality of a man who had caused pain to so many. In the next part, we will explore Ted Bundy's time on death row, his reflections, confessions, and the final days before his execution. Ted Bundy's time on death row was a complex chapter in a dark story. Behind the walls of the Florida State Prison, the man who once captivated courtrooms with his charm was left to confront the consequences of his actions, isolated and awaiting his fate. Death row is unlike any other part of the prison system. It is a place of intense waiting, days and nights marked by silence, reflection, and an ever-looming finality. For Bundy, it was a chance to grapple with his legacy, and perhaps reveal parts of himself he had kept hidden. Unlike many inmates who kept to themselves, Bundy remained a figure of intense public interest. Journalists and psychologists sought to understand him, to unravel the mind behind the killings. He agreed to several interviews, offering glimpses into his thoughts, some sincere, some evasive. One of the most revealing moments came in a series of confessions Bundy gave before his execution. These statements shocked many, as he admitted to more victims than previously known, including crimes that had baffled investigators. His confessions extended the horror, showing that the full scope of his violence might never be fully understood. Yet these admissions also raised questions. Was Bundy seeking to take responsibility, or was he manipulating the narrative one final time? His motives remained debated among experts and true crime enthusiasts alike. During his years on death row, Bundy's behavior was a mixture of defiance and reflection. At times he appeared to deny remorse, maintaining a cold exterior. At others he expressed regret for the pain he had caused, though many questioned the sincerity of these statements. Psychologists who studied Bundy during this period described a man struggling with his identity. His intelligence and self-awareness were undeniable, yet so was a chilling detachment from the human cost of his crimes. The contradictions made him a fascinating, if deeply disturbing, subject. Bundy's final days were marked by a mix of public fascination and private tension. Supporters and detractors debated his character, while families of victims awaited justice. As his execution date approached, Bundy maintained a calm demeanor,
He spent time with a few close acquaintances, wrote letters, and prepared for what was to come. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. His final moments were silent, a stark contrast to the noise and spectacle that had surrounded his life. The execution closed a grim chapter, but opened many more questions about crime, punishment, and the human psyche. Bundy's story remains a subject of study and debate, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath a friendly smile. Ted Bundy's execution marked the end of his personal story, but the ripples of his crimes continued to spread far beyond that day. His case changed the way law enforcement, psychologists, and the public thought about serial killers, and it influenced the criminal justice system in important ways. In the years following Bundy's death, police departments across the United States began to study his case carefully. They wanted to understand how one man could evade capture for so long, why he targeted specific victims, and what could be done to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Bundy's ability to appear trustworthy and charming made him a master of deception, and this was a lesson that law enforcement agencies took seriously. His case helped usher in a new era of criminal profiling, where investigators used behavioral science to predict and track potential offenders. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, which had been formed in the 1970s, drew heavily on cases like Bundy's. Agents like John Douglas and Robert Ressler studied his methods to develop profiles that could help identify serial killers before they struck again. These profiles combined details about the killer's background, habits, and likely future behavior, offering a powerful tool for detectives. Before Bundy, the idea of a serial killer wasn't well known outside police circles. His case helped bring public awareness to this chilling reality. Movies, books, and documentaries followed, each exploring the psychology of these criminals and the devastating impact they had on victims and communities. But beyond influencing law enforcement techniques, Bundy's crimes also had a profound effect on society's understanding of safety and trust. His story was a stark reminder that danger could hide behind a friendly face. This led to changes in how people approached personal safety, especially women, who had been his primary targets. Women across the country became more cautious about meeting strangers or accepting rides from unknown men. Self-defense classes grew in popularity, and parents began teaching their children about stranger danger with renewed seriousness. Bundy's story, horrifying as it was, played a role in educating the public about risk. On a legal level, Bundy's trial and conviction also brought attention to the death penalty debate. His case became a touchstone in discussions about capital punishment, with many arguing that his crimes deserved the harshest penalty, while others questioned whether justice was best served by execution. Bundy's story also prompted conversations about mental health and the criminal justice system. Psychologists debated whether he was a product of his environment, or if there were deeper biological and psychological factors at play. These discussions helped pave the way for more research into the roots of violent behavior. Family members of Bundy's victims, who had endured unimaginable pain, became vocal advocates for victims' rights. Their courage in speaking out brought greater attention to the needs of survivors and influenced laws designed to protect them. In the decades since Bundy's death, his story has been revisited many times, from books and films to podcasts and academic studies. Each retelling tries to make sense of the incomprehensible, to find meaning in the tragedy, and to learn lessons for the future. While Bundy's name remains infamous, the real focus should always be on the victims, the lives cut short, the families shattered, and the communities scarred. Remembering them keeps the humanity alive in a story that could otherwise be consumed by the darkness of the killer's actions. Understanding Ted Bundy's impact means facing uncomfortable truths about human nature, crime, and justice. It's a reminder that vigilance, compassion, and knowledge are crucial in preventing such horrors from happening again. Ted Bundy's psychology has fascinated experts and true crime enthusiasts for decades. What made him tick? What drove him to commit such horrific crimes? Understanding his mind helps us piece together not only his story, but also offers insights into the minds of other offenders. Bundy was often described as charming, intelligent, and seemingly normal, traits that allowed him to gain the trust of his victims and those around him. But beneath this exterior lurked a disturbed and violent mind. Psychologists classify Bundy as a psychopath, a person with a specific personality disorder, characterized by a lack of empathy, superficial charm, manipulativeness, and a failure to accept responsibility for actions. What stands out in Bundy's case is how well he could mask these traits. He was skilled at presenting himself as someone trustworthy, even likable. This ability is sometimes called masking, or surface charm, and it is a hallmark of many psychopaths. Experts also note that Bundy exhibited what's known as a lust-murder pattern. This means his crimes were motivated in part by sexual fantasies and desires that he acted out through violence. He often targeted young women who fit a particular physical type, which suggested a deep obsessive fixation. In interviews and during his trial, Bundy downplayed or denied much of what was suggested about his mental state, but posthumous analyses, including those by forensic psychologists, have given us more clues. Bundy's childhood offers some context, though it does not excuse his actions. He had a complicated early life, with questions about his parentage and reports of emotional neglect. Some accounts suggest he was shy and awkward in youth, sometimes bullied or isolated. Still, many who knew Bundy before his crimes later said he seemed like a normal young man. His ability to live a double life, appearing as a student, a boyfriend, or a helpful stranger, adds to the chilling nature of his story. Researchers have also explored neurological factors that may have contributed to his behavior. Some studies suggest that brain injuries, chemical imbalances, or genetic predispositions can increase the risk of violent behavior, though these are never sole causes. Bundy's case helped highlight the importance of early intervention and the challenges in identifying potential violent offenders before they commit crimes. It also raised questions about how society supports mental health and addresses dangerous behavior. The field of criminal psychology has grown significantly since Bundy's time. Techniques such as criminal profiling, risk assessment, and behavioral analysis are now standard tools used to understand and capture offenders. Still, Bundy remains a case study in extremes, a reminder of how appearances can deceive and how darkness can hide in plain sight. Understanding Bundy's psychology does not provide simple answers, but it helps us grasp the complexity of human behavior and the importance of vigilance and compassion in society. The investigation to catch Ted Bundy was a complex and intense process that showcased both the challenges and breakthroughs in law enforcement during the 1970s. At a time before the digital age, detectives had to rely on careful observation, eyewitness accounts, and emerging forensic techniques to piece together the puzzle. Bundy was a master of evasion. He traveled across multiple states, often using different aliases, making it difficult for police departments to connect the dots. His crimes spanned Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida, which meant several law enforcement agencies were involved, often with little coordination. One key aspect of the investigation was the use of composite sketches. After surviving an attack in Utah, one of Bundy's victims was able to provide detailed descriptions of her assailant. These sketches were circulated widely, and soon similar reports came from other states. Eyewitness testimonies were crucial. Witnesses described a man who was polite and unassuming, often seen driving a distinctive Volkswagen Beetle. This vehicle became a central piece of evidence, as it was linked to many of Bundy's disappearances. The police began to notice a pattern, not just in the type of victim or location, but in Bundy's methods. He often feigned injury or disability to gain sympathy and lure victims closer. This tactic, known as the disability ruse, showed his manipulative and calculating nature. Detectives also relied on forensic evidence, which, while not as advanced as today's standards, still played a role. For example, bite mark analysis was used to connect Bundy to some of his victims, though this method has since become controversial. Bundy's arrest in August 1975 in Utah marked a turning point. He was initially pulled over for driving a stolen vehicle, but further investigation revealed more about his background and potential connection to the ongoing string of murders. After his arrest, Bundy was linked to several more crimes through careful interrogation and cross-examination. However, he continued to deny guilt, often manipulating those around him, and attempting to control the narrative. The most intense period of the investigation unfolded in Florida, where Bundy committed some of his final and most brutal crimes. His arrest in 1978 was the result of persistent police work and community vigilance. One dramatic moment in the investigation was Bundy's escape from custody. Twice he managed to flee, once from a courthouse, and once from jail, demonstrating his resourcefulness and desperation. These escapes caused widespread panic and increased media attention. Law enforcement agencies coordinated massive manhunts, and the public was urged to be vigilant. The eventual recapture of Bundy after his second escape was a significant relief. He was finally brought to justice, facing trial for multiple murders. Throughout the investigation, the evolving techniques of forensic science, the dedication of law enforcement, and the courage of surviving victims and witnesses all played a role in bringing Bundy to account. Bundy's case also highlighted the need for better communication between states and agencies, leading to improved databases and collaboration in future investigations. The manhunt and trial remain one of the most compelling stories in criminal history, illustrating both the dark ingenuity of a serial killer and the determined efforts of those seeking justice. As the investigation closed in on Ted Bundy, the stage was set for one of the most intense and closely watched criminal trials in American history. Bundy's capture in Florida had finally brought the man responsible for a terrifying spree of violence to face justice. Bundy's trial began in 1979 in Miami-Dade County, where he was charged with the murders of two young women, Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, brutally attacked at the Chi Omega sorority house on Florida State University's campus. The details of the case were horrific, but it was Bundy's own behavior during the trial that captured as much attention as the crime itself. Unlike many accused criminals, Bundy chose to represent himself in court. His decision surprised many and added a chilling dimension to the proceedings. His intelligence, charm and manipulative skills were on full display as he cross-examined witnesses, challenged evidence, and sought to control the courtroom drama. Throughout the trial, Bundy maintained a cold, calculating demeanor. He alternated between moments of arrogance and apparent vulnerability, attempting to influence the jury and sway public opinion. His performance was unsettling, revealing a mind that was both sharp and deeply disturbed. One of the most powerful moments came when Bundy attempted to use his legal knowledge to discredit the testimony of the surviving victim, Kimberly Leach, and other witnesses. The prosecution worked tirelessly to protect the witnesses and present a clear, compelling case. Forensic evidence played a crucial role in the trial. The bite marks found on one of the victims matched Bundy's dental impressions, a form of forensic identification that was both controversial and groundbreaking at the time. This evidence linked him directly to the crimes, reinforcing the testimonies of survivors and witnesses. The prosecution also painted a detailed picture of Bundy's history of violence, travel patterns, and behaviors, demonstrating the premeditated nature of his attacks. They showed that Bundy was not a random killer, but someone who planned his crimes and carefully selected his victims. Bundy's defense, on the other hand, tried to cast doubt on the evidence, questioning the reliability of eyewitnesses and forensic methods. They also attempted to portray Bundy as a victim of circumstance, though this strategy was met with skepticism. Media coverage of the trial was intense. Reporters, photographers, and cameras filled the courtroom, bringing the drama of the case into the homes of millions. Bundy's chilling charisma made him a figure both feared and strangely fascinated over. Public reaction was mixed. Some were horrified by the details of the crimes, while others were captivated by Bundy's persona, a troubling reminder of how charm and evil can coexist. As the trial progressed, the defense's attempts to delay and disrupt the proceedings frustrated many, but the prosecution remained steadfast. They worked to ensure that justice was served, not only for the victims, but for the entire community affected by Bundy's reign of terror. After weeks of testimony and legal battles, the jury deliberated. Their verdict was clear. Bundy was found guilty of the murders. The decision brought relief but also opened a new chapter, the sentencing phase. The judge sentenced Bundy to death, a sentence that matched the severity of his crimes. But even with the verdict, Bundy's story was far from over. He continued to manipulate, deny and try to escape justice in the years that followed. The trial of Ted Bundy remains a landmark case in the annals of criminal justice. It highlighted both the advances and limitations of forensic science and law enforcement, and showcased the complex interplay of personality, crime and justice. The chilling story of Ted Bundy's crimes, capture and trial continues to fascinate and horrify. His case serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers lurking behind a friendly face, and the importance of vigilance and resilience in the pursuit of justice.
After his conviction and sentencing, Ted Bundy was transferred to Florida State Prison, where he awaited his fate on death row. The atmosphere in the prison was tense, as guards and inmates alike were wary of the notorious killer. Bundy's presence sent ripples through the prison system. Here was a man who had eluded capture for years, who had manipulated countless people, and whose crimes had shocked the nation. Life on death row was isolating. Bundy was confined to a small cell, with strict routines designed to limit contact and prevent further manipulation. Yet, Bundy was a master of adapting to his environment. He remained calm and composed, often reading books, studying law and writing letters. Despite his grim situation, Bundy tried to maintain a semblance of control over his life. Prison officials were cautious, but also intrigued by Bundy's unusual behavior. Unlike many prisoners, Bundy was articulate and calm during interviews, often giving detailed accounts of his actions. However, he rarely admitted guilt. Instead, Bundy frequently denied responsibility or minimized his crimes, claiming innocence or blaming others. This denial was part of his complex personality, a mixture of arrogance, denial, and a deep need to control the narrative around him. Bundy's refusal to fully confess made it difficult for investigators and victims' families seeking closure. It was as if he wanted to keep some parts of his dark story hidden, to maintain power even behind bars. In the years that followed his sentencing, Bundy's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. Despite the tight security, he attempted to escape from prison multiple times. These escape attempts were bold and audacious, highlighting his cunning and resourcefulness. The first escape occurred in 1977 from a Colorado jail. Bundy had managed to fashion a fake cast for his arm and used it to conceal tools he had smuggled in. During a medical appointment, he slipped out of the facility and vanished for 6 days before being recaptured. This event stunned authorities and the public alike, revealing just how dangerous and determined Bundy was. But the second escape was even more daring. In 1978, Bundy managed to climb out of a second-story window of a prison in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, and fled into the surrounding wilderness. He was on the run for several days, evading capture by hiking through the Rocky Mountains. Bundy's third escape attempt was the most infamous. Later in 1978, from the same Colorado prison, Bundy escaped by jumping from a 14-foot-high window into a courtyard and running away. This escape led to a nationwide manhunt. During this time on the run, Bundy traveled south to Florida, where he resumed his violent spree. In January 1978, he attacked several women on the Florida State University campus, including the brutal murders of Lisa Livy and Margaret Bowman at the Chi Omega sorority house. These crimes shocked the nation, as Bundy had been considered captured. His return to violence demonstrated his dangerousness and complete lack of remorse. It also highlighted how, despite efforts to confine him, Bundy could still wreak havoc. Eventually, Bundy was apprehended again in Florida after a traffic stop. This time, authorities made sure he would remain behind bars. In Florida, Bundy faced new charges for his murders and was put on trial again, this time with even more evidence against him. The courts were determined to ensure that Bundy could never escape justice again. While on death row, Bundy's legal battles continued. He filed numerous appeals, trying to delay his execution. His attorneys worked tirelessly to find new evidence or procedural errors to challenge the convictions. Bundy himself became a controversial figure in the media, granting interviews where he sometimes admitted to some crimes, but withheld others. One of the most chilling aspects of Bundy's time in prison was his eventual partial confession. Shortly before his execution, Bundy spoke with investigators and admitted to many of his murders, but not all. His confessions provided valuable closure to many cases, yet his refusal to fully disclose the truth left lingering questions. Throughout his incarceration, Bundy's interactions with prison staff and fellow inmates varied. Some saw him as a dangerous predator, while others were fascinated by his intelligence and personality. But no one could ignore the darkness that surrounded him. As the years passed, the date of Bundy's execution loomed closer. In 1989, after more than a decade on death row, Bundy was finally put to death in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. His final moments were reportedly calm, though many watched with a mix of relief and somber reflection. Bundy's life and crimes left a lasting impact on American society, the criminal justice system, and the public's understanding of serial killers. The legacy of Ted Bundy is complex. He is remembered as one of the most notorious serial killers in history, but also as a man whose story revealed the dark depths of human nature. His case led to changes in how law enforcement handles serial crimes and highlighted the importance of forensic science and victim advocacy. Bundy's story serves as a chilling reminder of how evil can hide behind charm and intelligence. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil and the capacity for darkness within individuals. Following Ted Bundy's execution in 1989, the reverberations of his crimes echoed far beyond the prison walls. His case became one of the most studied in criminal history, sparking widespread discussions about the nature of evil, the criminal mind, and how society can prevent such tragedies in the future. One of the most significant impacts of Bundy's case was on law enforcement techniques. During the 1970s, when Bundy was active, police departments across different states rarely shared information with one another. Bundy's crimes spanned several states: Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida, and this lack of coordination initially hindered the investigation. His ability to move between jurisdictions without detection highlighted a gap in the criminal justice system. As a result, his case became a driving force behind the establishment of more coordinated databases and communication systems among police departments nationwide. Today, tools like the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, developed by the FBI, help law enforcement agencies share information about violent crimes, linking cases that may have once seemed isolated. Bundy's legacy, in this way, contributed to improving the way serial crimes are tracked and solved. Another lasting effect was the advancement of forensic science. In Bundy's time, forensic technologies were limited, DNA analysis was in its infancy, and many crimes went unsolved because of a lack of evidence or proper scientific tools. Bundy's case underscored the importance of preserving physical evidence and using scientific methods to identify suspects. Over time, forensic science evolved, becoming a critical part of criminal investigations, helping solve cold cases, and bringing justice to victims long after crimes occurred. Beyond forensic and procedural changes, Bundy's crimes had a profound psychological and cultural impact. His case became a dark mirror, reflecting society's fascination with serial killers, the psychology behind them, and the terrifying reality that such evil can sometimes lurk behind an unassuming facade. Psychologists and criminologists studied Bundy extensively, trying to understand what drove him to commit such horrific acts. He was often described as a psychopathic predator, charming and manipulative on the surface, but lacking empathy and remorse. His case helped shape modern profiles of serial killers, leading to better behavioral analysis techniques used by the FBI and other agencies. Profilers study patterns, motives, and personality traits to predict and catch offenders more quickly. Public interest in Bundy's story also sparked a broader conversation about victim safety and awareness. His victims were often vulnerable women, targeted late at night or in isolated places. This raised awareness about the dangers faced by women and the importance of community vigilance. In many communities, safety campaigns, neighborhood watches, and educational programs were launched to empower people with knowledge and tools to protect themselves and others. The media played a significant role in both informing and shaping public perception. Bundy's crimes were widely reported, and his story became the subject of books, documentaries and films. However, this intense media focus sometimes risked glamorizing the killer, overshadowing the victims' stories. In recent years, there has been a shift toward telling the stories of the victims with respect and dignity, ensuring they are not forgotten amid the sensationalism surrounding the killer. Bundy's victims, Lisa Livy, Margaret Bowman, Kimberly Leach and many others, are remembered as individuals with lives and families, not just names on a list. This approach helps humanize the tragedy, reminding us that behind every true crime story are real people whose lives were forever changed or ended. The Ted Bundy case remains a powerful example of how a single individual can inflict enormous harm, but also how a society can learn and evolve from tragedy. It reminds us of the importance of vigilance, empathy, and justice. For those who listen to stories like this, it's a chance to reflect on human nature, the darkness that can exist, but also the strength of communities and law enforcement working tirelessly to protect and serve. The story of Ted Bundy did not end with his execution. In fact, it has continued to ripple through popular culture, shaping how society views serial killers and true crime as a genre. His case marked a turning point in how the media and the public consume stories of violent crime. Bundy became one of the first serial killers whose story was told in real time through extensive media coverage, interviews and public fascination. This phenomenon sparked what some call the Ted Bundy effect, the idea that a killer's charisma and media presence can captivate audiences and create a lasting cultural imprint. Films, books, and documentaries about Bundy have portrayed him in various lights. Some focus on the chilling details of his crimes, others explore his complex psychology or the chilling contrast between his outward charm and inner darkness. This duality between Bundy's public persona and his horrific actions makes him a subject of endless curiosity and study. Why was he so effective at deceiving people? How did he avoid suspicion for so long? These questions continue to intrigue criminal psychologists and true crime enthusiasts alike. At the same time, the widespread fascination with Bundy raised ethical questions about the media's role in covering violent crime. Was the coverage too sensational? Did it glorify the killer at the expense of the victims? In recent years, there has been a conscious effort to shift the narrative away from glorifying criminals and instead focus on the victims, their stories and the impact on communities. This shift aims to bring respect and dignity back to those who suffered. Ted Bundy's story also influenced the way true crime storytelling developed as a genre. Podcasts, docu-series, and books about serial killers often cite Bundy as a pivotal case that helped create the framework for profiling, investigation, and public engagement. His case introduced many to the concept of a serial killer as a distinct criminal type. Before Bundy, the term wasn't widely known, and his crimes helped police and the public understand that a single person could commit multiple murders with a common pattern. This knowledge led to advancements in criminal profiling, a technique that has since been applied to numerous other cases worldwide. Profilers analyze behaviors, victim selection, and crime scene evidence to predict a suspect's characteristics, helping narrow down investigations. Bundy's crimes also sparked conversations about mental health, criminal pathology, and the limits of rehabilitation. He was studied as a case of extreme psychopathy, showing a profound lack of empathy, superficial charm, and manipulative tendencies. These traits challenge many traditional ideas about crime and punishment, forcing experts to consider how to identify and manage individuals who exhibit such dangerous behavior. On a societal level, Bundy's case highlighted the vulnerabilities of women, especially in certain social contexts during the 1970s. This led to changes in public safety awareness and law enforcement practices focused on protecting vulnerable populations. Neighborhood watches, safety awareness programs, and educational campaigns were launched in many communities. These efforts aim to empower people with knowledge about personal safety and encourage vigilance against potential predators. Despite the horrors of his crimes, Bundy's case has also inspired improvements in law enforcement cooperation. His ability to evade capture across state lines revealed weaknesses in how police shared information.
Today, agencies collaborate more closely, with databases and communication networks designed to identify and apprehend criminals operating in multiple jurisdictions. Bundy's case was a catalyst for these important changes. As we reflect on Bundy's legacy, it's clear that his story is a cautionary tale. It teaches us about the depths of human cruelty, but also about society's ability to learn, adapt, and protect itself. For listeners interested in true crime, Bundy's story serves as a reminder to look beyond the headlines and sensationalism. It invites us to understand the complexity behind the crimes, the victims, and the efforts to bring justice. While much of Ted Bundy's life and crimes have been widely documented, there remain lesser-known facets and lingering mysteries that add layers to his story, sparking curiosity and debate among experts and enthusiasts alike. One of these mysteries revolves around the true extent of his crimes. Bundy confessed to 30 murders, but some investigators believe the number may have been higher. He hinted at more victims during interviews but never fully disclosed the details, leaving a chilling question mark over his full tally. Why did Bundy withhold some information? Some speculate he enjoyed maintaining control over the narrative, continuing to manipulate those around him until the very end. Others think he feared losing the small measure of power and infamy that came with partial confessions. This ambiguity has led to ongoing efforts by investigators to connect unsolved cases from the 1970s to Bundy's known timeline and locations. Some cold cases have been reopened, with forensic technology like DNA analysis offering new hope for answers. Another intriguing aspect is Bundy's early life, which has been scrutinized to understand how a seemingly normal child could develop into a notorious killer. Raised by his grandparents, and initially told his mother was his sister, Bundy's childhood was marked by secrecy and identity confusion. Psychologists have explored how these early family dynamics, combined with social isolation and possible neurological issues, may have contributed to his later behavior. However, no definitive cause has been found, underscoring the complexity of human psychology. Bundy's charm and intelligence also stand out as paradoxical traits. He was described by acquaintances as personable, witty, and even kind in certain moments. This facade allowed him to lure victims and evade suspicion, demonstrating a chilling ability to wear a mask of normalcy. This duality challenges how we perceive evil, reminding us that it does not always announce itself loudly, but can hide behind an everyday smile. There are also questions about Bundy's relationships. His long-term girlfriend, Elizabeth Klutfer, was unaware of his crimes for years, despite noticing strange behaviors. Her memoir provides insights into his manipulative nature and the difficulty of reconciling the man she knew with the killer he became. The complex relationship highlights how abusers can deceive those closest to them, and how denial and fear can prevent people from confronting uncomfortable truths. Lastly, Bundy's final moments and last words have been the subject of speculation and interpretation. Some view his execution as a form of closure, while others see it as an incomplete chapter in a story that still haunts true crime history. The fact that Bundy sought to control the narrative up to the end, granting interviews and confessing selectively, adds to the enduring enigma of his character. For listeners, these lesser-known angles remind us that true crime stories are rarely straightforward. They involve layers of human complexity, societal factors, and unanswered questions. As we continue to explore Bundy's story, it's important to keep in mind the victims, whose lives were tragically cut short, and the families who still seek closure. As we reach the conclusion of this exploration into the life and crimes of Ted Bundy, it is worth taking a moment to reflect on the many layers this story has revealed. From his early years to his terrifying acts, from the painstaking investigations to the cultural impact, Bundy's case remains one of the most haunting in modern history. The true horror lies not only in the gruesome nature of his crimes, but in the chilling reminder that evil can wear a familiar face. Bundy's story forces us to question our assumptions about people, appearances, and trust. It's a stark lesson in vigilance and the importance of listening to intuition when something feels wrong. This case also shines a light on the limitations and challenges of the criminal justice system at the time. Investigators had to work without the forensic tools we have today. The tireless dedication of detectives, witnesses, and survivors helped bring Bundy to justice, yet his ability to slip through the cracks early on reminds us that systems can and must improve. In the years since Bundy's execution, forensic science has advanced dramatically. DNA technology, criminal profiling, and victim advocacy have all evolved, helping to prevent similar tragedies and aiding cold case investigations. Bundy's case was a catalyst for some of these changes, showing how one person's actions can influence society in unexpected ways. Beyond the forensic and legal aspects, Bundy's story has had a profound cultural impact. Books, films, and documentaries continue to dissect his life, motivations, and methods, reflecting our collective fascination with understanding darkness. Yet this fascination must always be tempered with respect for the victims and their families. Their stories are the heart of this narrative. Though often overshadowed by Bundy's infamy, each victim was a person with hopes, dreams, and loved ones. Remembering them honors their memory and reminds us that behind every true crime headline are real lives forever changed. As listeners, you've journeyed through the chilling details, the investigation's twists, and the psychological complexities. It's natural to feel a mix of emotions, curiosity, sorrow, even disbelief. These stories challenge us to confront the uncomfortable and to appreciate the value of justice and compassion. In the end, the legacy of Ted Bundy is a cautionary tale. It urges us to be aware, to support those at risk, and to improve how society responds to crime and trauma. It reminds us that evil can be hidden but never fully concealed, and that vigilance and care can help protect the vulnerable. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's most notorious true crime stories. May it deepen your understanding, spark thoughtful reflection, and inspire kindness in the face of darkness. If you found this documentary engaging, feel free to revisit or share it with others who appreciate calm, detailed storytelling. True crime stories like this one serve as reminders of our shared humanity and the ongoing quest for justice. This concludes our exploration of Ted Bundy. Stay safe, stay curious, and take care.